A new bill on the general elections is under debate in Bolivia. Spanish health authorities have reported the highest number of new COVID-19 cases since the country's lockdown ended. Palestinian authorities have rejected a deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to normalise relations. From the headquarters of Teleso English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We begin in Bolivia, where the Chamber of Deputies is debating a bill that would establish a deadline for the holding of general elections after its approval in the upper house. Meanwhile, social and trade union organisations maintain roadblocks across the country on the 11th day of a general strike. The bill sets October 18th as the deadline for the holding of the general elections and establishes sanctions against anyone who violates or attempts to change this deadline. The bill was proposed by legislators of the Movement Towards Socialism Party and seeks to prevent yet another postponement of the general elections, which were moved for the fourth time by the Electoral Tribunal from September to October 16th, sparking widespread protests. The Bolivian workers Centre, the chief trade union federation of the country, together with the social movements of the Unity Pact Alliance, are now calling for the vote to be held a week earlier on October 11th, but have made clear that they are open to negotiations. Cuban health authorities presented an update on the COVID-19 figures this Thursday.
With the analysis of these 4,591 samples, 46 people tested positive for COVID-19. 46 people in which SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 were detected. And with this behavior of testing and results, 314,499 tests have been carried out, and 3,174 people have been diagnosed with COVID-19.
And the National Director of Epidemiology at the Cuban Ministry of Public Health made reference to the number of people who have recovered from COVID-19.
Yesterday there were 21 discharges, all from Havana. It is a good number, but unfortunately when we compare it with the number of cases diagnosed yesterday, it is still a negative figure. And with these 21 discharges yesterday, 2,525 patients have recovered. This represents 80% of all the cases diagnosed in our country.
And lastly, Dr. Duran confirmed the death of one person from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours.
Unfortunately, one patient has died yesterday from the disease. Today, Cuba reports 89 deaths. The country's mortality rate is 2.8%.
On Thursday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the suspension of private charter flights between the United States and Cuba starting in October. According to a statement, the decision will affect all charter flights under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of Transportation, except for authorized public charter flights to and from Havana and authorized private charter flights for emergency medical purposes, search and rescue activities, and other travel deemed in the interest of the United States. Meanwhile, family visits to Cuba have been heavily impacted under the Trump administration, which banned commercial flights to all Cuban airports except Havana late last year, before imposing the same restrictions on charter flights from the U.S. in January. The latest measure aims at tightening the sanctions imposed by the United States against the Cuban people. This Thursday is the 94th anniversary of Fidel Castro's birth. To mark the date, the leader of the Cuban Revolution will be remembered in an international video conference from Havana, which will see the participation of distinguished diplomats and politicians. We take a look at the legacy of this towering figure who built a socialist revolution on the doorstep of the United States.
As a young man, Fidel planned to overthrow Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. He led a guerrilla war in the cities and in the Sierra Maestra mountain range. The resistance won the war, and Castro began building a revolution that set an example for the world. He focused on giving the Cuban people, previously deprived of many basic human rights, the opportunity of owning the land they worked on, the ability to read and write, in the fastest literacy campaign ever seen. Also the possibility of a fairer distribution of the country's wealth, which until then had been in the hands of very few families and American companies. Since day one, The United States tried to topple him in every possible way. Several U.S. administrations attempted to unsuccessfully remove him by assassination, through an economic blockade and warfare, including the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, supported by President John Kennedy's government. The mercenary invasion is remembered worldwide as the first defeat of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. Fidel dedicated his life to building a different world for the Cuban people and those of the rest of the globe. He lived to the ripe old age of 90, despite all the efforts of 11 U.S. presidents. He lived to see his revolution survived and triumphed despite the difficulties, and made Cuba an exceptional example in many ways. The island nation has one of the lowest infant mortality rates in the world, a free and solid educational system, and now is leading the battle against COVID-19 due to its highly educated health personnel and Cuban development in the biopharmaceutical industry. A visionary like very few men in the world, Fidel also promoted international solidarity that saw Cuban doctors sent to save hundreds of thousands of lives across the world, as seen during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. These same efforts have returned sight to millions of patients from over 30 countries through innovative eye surgery. Even now, Cuban doctors are requested all over the world and have been sent to over 30 countries to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, implementing the health protocols that have already proven effective in Cuba, where 80% of patients have recovered from the virus. He would have turned 94 this August 13th, and although he remains a highly controversial figure to some, Fidel Castro, the icon of the Cold War, the leader of the bearded revolutionary, friend of Hugo Chavez, Diego Maradona, or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, was a man who radically transformed the small Caribbean nation of Cuba and set an example of emancipation and anti-imperialism against all odds. In Cuba, he is remembered as an irreplaceable leader, and in the world, is seen as a legend, the man who defeated the most powerful country in the world and lived long enough to see his revolution succeed.
Now we'll be right back after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Spanish health authorities reported over 2,900 new COVID-19 cases on Thursday, representing the highest number since the country's lockdown ended, while noting that the Madrid region is the hardest hit area.
In Spain, the number of reported cases continues to rise, both by date of diagnosis and by date of onset of symptoms. But it's true that it's a gentle rise that allows the implementation of control measures in a much more serious and much more controlled way. Madrid is one of those with the more dangerous situation. I think they are cause for attention. We have to act, and they are acting a lot and very well, but the entire population and all the health systems and all of us who work in the health system have to maintain tension.
The governor of the U.S. state of Nevada announced on Thursday that the state had officially reached 1,000 COVID-19 deaths.
Today, it is with great sadness that we must recognize that Nevada has reached the 1,000 death toll for COVID-19. The grief felt by Nevadans for these individuals, these families, these friends, is enormous. The First Lady and I send our condolences to all of the loved ones of the more than 1,000 Nevadans who have lost their life to a disease. And we ask your help to not have any more people die as a result of COVID-19, to do what we can to mitigate this terrible disease.
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin has stated that progress is being made in Brexit trade talks after meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson for the first time since taking office in June. As the talks are ongoing to try and reach a deal between London and Brussels, neighbouring Ireland, which is a member of the European Union, has expressed concern regarding the impact on border issues with Northern Ireland. The Brexit talks are set to continue until October, but fears are growing that a deal will not be reached before the deadline on December 31st.
There is a landing zone, if that will is there on both. I think where there's a will, there's a way. It seems to me that there is a landing zone, if that will is there on both sides, and I think it is, on the European Union side and on the British side, to find that landing zone. We both agreed on the absolute necessity for a free trade agreement that would be tariff-free, quota-free, that's the best possible outcome for the European Union, for the United Kingdom.
Italy has imposed mandatory coronavirus testing for all travellers arriving from Croatia, Greece, Malta and Spain, and banned all visitors from Colombia in a bid to avoid imported COVID-19 cases. Health authorities are particularly concerned that Italians returning from vacations abroad may be bringing the virus back with them and passing it on. Travellers arriving at an airport, port or border crossing can choose from a number of options, including rapid tests on the spot or the presentation of a certificate obtained within the last 72 hours, which shows they are COVID-19 free. Italy has reported over 252,000 coronavirus cases and more than 35,000 deaths, making it the fourth hardest hit nation in Europe. Australia's virus-hit Victoria state reported a major drop in new coronavirus cases on Thursday, but officials have warned against negligence amid a worrying spread of the virus in regional areas outside Melbourne. Only 278 new cases and 8 deaths were detected in Victoria, the lowest number in weeks, while a smaller outbreak in neighbouring New South Wales produced 12 additional cases and 1 death. The surge in Melbourne, the capital of Victoria, had pushed daily infection rates over 700 in recent weeks. Dozens have died during a second wave that struck after Australia appeared to have controlled the epidemic. There are now signs that strict measures, including an overnight curfew and the shutdown of non-essential businesses, are bringing the new outbreak under control. And to date, almost 21 million COVID-19 cases and over 750,000 deaths have been confirmed worldwide. Latin America is currently the hardest hit region by the pandemic, with over 5.8 million cases and 228,000 fatalities. However, Europe is experiencing a surge of new outbreaks in different areas. China has demanded that the United States put a halt to discriminatory measures against Chinese companies, with the aim of clearing a path towards implementing a Phase 1 trade deal between the two countries.
The coronavirus pandemic and the restrictive measures the US imposed on Chinese exports undoubtedly affected the purchase of certain goods and services. Under the current circumstances, it is necessary for both parties to work together and overcome the difficulties. We hope the US stops the restrictive measures and discriminatory actions towards Chinese companies and create conditions to implement the Phase 1 trade deal.
Heavy rains have caused serious floods in southwest China's Yunnan province. The rains pounded Shantung City through Wednesday night to early Thursday morning, causing serious floods in many low-lying streets and some homes. The water levels in the urban area of Shaoyang district exceeded 40 centimetres. The flooding created traffic jams and police had to stand in the water to direct vehicles during rush hour. Local authorities are working to drain the water and distributing sandbags to prevent the water from entering homes. Local firefighters have evacuated people who are trapped to safe places. And we have more news coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Israel and the United Arab Emirates announced they had reached an agreement on Thursday to normalise relations. The deal was brokered by the United States, with President Donald Trump taking the credit for facilitating what he called a historic peace agreement, which would see the United Arab Emirates become the third Arab state to have full diplomatic ties with Israel after Egypt and Jordan. A joint statement by the UAE, Israel and the US said the breakthrough would advance peace in the Middle East region. As part of the agreement, Israel agreed to suspend the annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank, at least for now. And the Palestinian National Authority has rejected the agreement, highlighting the move undermines the Arab Peace Initiative and decisions over the Palestinian cause.
The Palestinian leadership announces its strong rejection and condemnation of the surprise American-Israeli Emirati tripartite declaration on a full normalization of relations between the occupying Israeli states and the United Arab Emirates, in exchange of an alleged temporary suspension of the plan to annex Palestinian lands and extend Israel's sovereignty over them. The Palestinian leadership sees this step as torpedoing the Arab Peace Initiative, the decisions of the Arab and Islamic summits, and international law, as well as an aggression against the Palestinian people and a neglect of the Palestinian rights and sanctities, first and foremost Jerusalem and the independent Palestinian state according to the borders of June 4, 1967.
And residents in the Gaza Strip, together with representatives of the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas, have also denounced the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, noting it undermines the legitimate struggle of the Palestinian people to end the Israeli occupation.
This agreement does not serve the Palestinian cause at all. It serves the Zionist ideas. This agreement encourages the occupation to continue denying the rights of all Palestinian people. Rather, it is the continuation of crimes and aggression against all Palestinian people. What was required was always to support the legitimate Palestinian struggle against the occupation, not to establish relations with it. As Palestinians, we cannot confront the annexation plan with comprehensive resistance supported by the Arab and international communities, not through normalization agreements with the occupation. We condemn the process of normalization with Israel. We all hope that the United Arab Emirates will offer support and aid to the Palestinian cause, not normalization. This is something that doesn't serve the Palestinian cause and is against the interests of the Palestinian people. Normalization does not serve the Arab nation and does not serve any Arab countries. This normalization could open the way for other Arab countries to follow the example of the Arab Emirates. There are Arab peace initiatives. The United Arab Emirates does not respect them, does not respect the agreements, and does not respect the feelings of the Palestinian people.
The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is fighting the ongoing desert locust infestations in East Africa, which pose a threat to people's livelihoods and food security. Significant progress has been made in a number of countries, especially in Kenya, where just a few of the 29 counties that were infested in February this year still have locusts today. According to the FAO, the threat of possible reinfestation towards the end of the year calls for careful and continued surveillance. From the beginning of January up until early August, the infestation of over 600,000 hectares across the East Africa region has been brought under control, with estimates that over 500 billion locusts have been killed in the entire region.
We wanted to control them as fast as possible before they reach in stage 5 and young adults, who will start again maybe copulating and laying more eggs. So we need to control it very fast.
We continue to monitor because locusts can go into places that cannot be easily reached and then emerge from there. So we will continue to strengthen our surveillance capacity, our control efforts, and our livelihood recovery efforts. So it's a process. So we can't specify a specific date that by this date they will go, but we can simply say by this date we have contained to a large extent what could have been a disaster.
Kenyan health authorities offered an update on COVID-19 cases this Thursday.
COVID-19 statistics today, 650 people have tested positive out of a sample size of 6,768 samples, all collected within the last 24 hours. It now brings the total number of positive cases to the country to 28,754. Of these cases, 633 are Kenyans, whereas 17 are foreigners, 391 are male, and 259 are female.
And Kenyan health authorities also provided an update on the COVID-19 death toll and the number of recoveries since the outbreak of the pandemic in the country.
We are happy to inform you that 490 patients have recovered from the disease, of which 308 are from the home-based care program, whereas 182 have been discharged from various hospitals. And so our total number of recoveries is 15,100. And we continue to extend our appreciation to our healthcare workers who have made this great achievement possible. And on a sad note, 4 patients have succumbed to the disease, bringing our fatality count to 460. We do continue to extend our sincere condolences to the families and friends of those who've lost their loved ones.
Opposition figures in Mali continue to demand that President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta step down, claiming this is the only solution to the ongoing political crisis.
Today, there is unspeakable repression followed by hasty judgments that we cannot accept. Today, there are political detainees from our ranks, and we do not intend to enter into any discussion until they are released outright. No provisional release, but a definite release. There have been killings in this country, 23 deaths, and today there is no indication of the perpetrators, sponsors and accomplices. This is unacceptable. In the absence of legal sanctions, today administratively we should have been told who is responsible, who gave the order and who is in accomplice. As long as this is not done, we will not be able to enter into any kind of discussion. We have indicated that we are not refusing to meet with Mr. Keïta, but that we will meet with him to discuss only the conditions of his departure.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesoenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.